Hey friends, Jordan here at Theology Unbound. Thank you for tuning in to another bonus episode where this week I had the opportunity to interview a man named Jon Harris, who is an author from New York, not New York City, but actually country New York. And he has a degree in history, and he's obtained his master's in divinity from Southeastern Seminary. The conversation was great. There's a lot of information. I want to encourage you as you listen to it, if you feel kind of lost, to really listen all the way to the end, because Jon starts to give some practical things that we can do as Christians to help our culture and society around us. You know, when we have these bonus episodes, I want to remind you that the purpose in doing this is to foster unity and understanding with the Christian community. Every time we have a guest on, they come from a variety of different denominations, and they're sharing their perspectives and insights from what they've learned. While their beliefs might not necessarily reflect our own, our goal is to create a space for open dialogue and respectful conversation. Together, we aim to explore the beauty of our differences and discover the common thread that unites us in faith in Jesus. So I'm glad that you're joining us on this journey as we move towards a greater understanding for the connection of the body of Christ. God bless. Enjoy the episode. Good day, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Theology Unbound. I'm your host, Jordan, and today we are going to have a special guest on. His name is Jon Harris. He wrote a new book called Against the Waves, Christian Order in a Liberal Age, and I want to bring him on to talk about who he is a little bit and why he decided to write the book, and I hope you guys are all blessed by the conversation. All right, well, special guest today. I really appreciate him taking the time to do this. I know a lot of our people in our church have probably never heard of you. Slowly but surely they will, as I keep pushing the book out to them. Jon talks about a lot of necessary things for the church today and the direction that it needs to go. So, Jon, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it, Jordan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I started to get familiar with your work through your podcast. Podcasting is such a great resource for us these days. And I got hooked once I started listening to the Conversations That Matter. I know you run a couple podcasts. The other one is American Reformer. Or no, it's American Churchman, yeah. And you started talking about these things about, history of America, some church history stuff, and a lot of political issues that people would say is controversial. We live in the kind of a day where political realities in church shouldn't mix, according to certain people. And so it just caught my ear, and I loved it. And you've written 3 books, I think.
Social Justice Goes to Church, Christianity and Social Justice, and the one that you're holding or that you were referencing, rather.
Right, I got it right here. I got the signed issue.
Christianity Liberalism are the main ones that put out there. So appreciate it. Appreciate you putting it out there.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you live in New York, and so we're out here in Idaho. So people in Idaho are gonna be like, "Oh, a New Yorker? Are you what's he gonna? He lives the city life, but you don't actually really live the city life. There's more to New York than New York City." Yeah.
Yeah, I live about 2 hours, depending on how fast you're going, I guess, hour and a half, 2 hours north of the city, actually. So I'm in the Hudson River Valley, and for people nationally, probably the biggest things to reference that maybe someone would be familiar with would be like the legend of Rip Van Winkle or the legend of Sleepy Hollow, or if you're familiar with like Hudson River School of Painting, Thomas Cole's houses, and
okay,
I am, and it's pretty country to now. People from the city have moved up, especially since COVID, where I am, but it's still apple orchard country and very different from the city.
Yeah, so you've been born and raised. I think I heard you say on one of your podcasts that the house you guys live in was built in the 1700s.
That I grew up in.
Oh, you grew up in, okay.
House now, but the house I grew up in from the probably late 1700s. I think we found the cornerstone for the barn, and the cornerstone said like 1787 or something like that on it, and the house would have been before that. So yeah, I mean it's like colonial stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about that. You've changed my perspective on a lot of things, particularly pertaining to the Civil War,
Mm,
even the American Revolution. But the mainline history books in school teach a certain narrative, and you really only get one side of the story mostly.
right. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I have a heritage, I guess, going everywhere. So New York is a place near and dear to me, but I always knew I didn't quite belong. I was a little bit of a misfit. My parents are both from California, and I
Mm.
was there. They moved out. My dad's a pastor when I was young. But Californians at that time were also transplants. So like my mom's family's from the Midwest, my dad's family's from the South, from Mississippi, and so family reunions were. He had a larger family, so mostly going down to Mississippi when I was growing up, and I feel like it gave me some perspective on different regions, and I just love this country. I love the natural beauty. I love the historical stuff, and I respect it. And so I think that's what motivated me to, in part at least, start kicking back against some of the woke stuff because they wanted to rip it all down and contextualize it, is what they call it, but really destroy it. And I don't want it destroyed. So that motivated me, along with obviously the attacks on Orthodox theology.
Hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned that your dad is a pastor. How long have you been a Christian?
Well, okay, so I'm gonna say this is the Baptist problem, right? Like a lot of churches have this where I was 6 years old when I made a profession.
Yeah.
So I guess you could say that I've been a Christian for 29 years of my life, but
Hallelujah.
at the same time, I'm 35.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I know in my early teenage years, I had some struggles with just wondering if that was legitimate. I think as a lot of Baptist kids do, and so I wondered at times, was I really saved when I was like 13 or 14 when I worked through those things?
Mm.
But when you come from a Christian background, I don't know if you have a Christian background or came
Well,
out of.
I do, but it was a pretty, modern American Christian background. I remember going to church a lot with my parents, um, especially, the Christmas and Easter services. But we went more than that. But similar, I got baptized in a Baptist church when I was 14. But
Yeah.
I wasn't really living a life honoring to the Lord after that.
Mm.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, you know, trusting in the sovereignty of God.
Yeah, yeah, and I think if the more churched you are sometimes, and the earlier you've made a profession of faith, you don't remember a life that you weren't really immersed in Christianity.
Mhm.
So I just say that, whether it was 6 or 13, 14, the Lord saved me, and I know that now, and I'm happy about it.
Well, I think that's going to tie in really well to the conversation of being immersed in a Christian culture, which we we are living in the remnants of one still, even though it's being attacked left and right. I know that uh, just recently the well, I don't want to say the argument, but the conversation on X was about the dystopian 60s or the
Yeah, is it
40s.
a conversation? Is it I don't know what to call it.
I guess it's a conversation.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
good though. So did you decide to go to Southern Baptist Seminary, or is it which one is it? Did you go to Southeastern?
I went to Southeastern, which is in
Yeah.
North Carolina. Yep.
Were you going to be a pastor?
I was planning on it. I was planning on possibly doing church planning. I was open to different things, chaplaincy, but I thought I'd be an adjunct professor because I really enjoyed academia. I liked history. I liked philosophy, and
Mm.
if I could get one of those degrees, I already had an undergrad in history, along with an MDiv, then I would do that and make that my tent making, and then also plant a church. And I was thinking I would do it on a college campus, most
Mm.
likely because I was involved in college ministry and loved that environment in so many ways. I mean, and college students, I say kids now, which is funny. I realized recently I was at a college career thing and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm an old, looking around. There's a moment it just kind of hits you. And I have a little daughter and, anyway, um, I I just love that environment though, because so many of these kids coming in they're open and they're trying to figure it out. And this is an entry point for Christians, I think, to try to persuade them that Christianity, and not just through arguments, but like Christian lifestyle, like this
Mm.
is what stability looks like, is compelling. Uh, and I saw firsthand students who didn't know anything about stability, seeing a husband and wife in a home, and then wanting that, and that was what I was looking at doing. But I guess God had different plans. I went to Liberty University after seminary, got a MA in history there. And while I was there, for 10 years, I had been a furniture repairman. So I was doing my own furniture repair business, working my way through. And I decided to speak out about Southeastern. And I had been graduated for about a year, but there, without getting into all the details, I had tried to go through proper channels, and I was meeting roadblocks. Professors were intimidated to speak out about what was happening there in regards to social justice, and I just decided to let her rip and let people know. And really, my thing was, if I would want to know this as a student coming in, and they're not telling them what they're going to get, and so I just wanted to caution people: this is what you're getting when you come to Southeastern. It's not just missions, which is what they're known for. It's also this social justice, and that just cascaded.
Mm.
I wasn't planning on doing a platform or being a podcaster or being like a national leader, anything similar to that. I just wanted to get the word out about Southeastern. And then I did a few more podcasts because people were, I didn't understand it at the time, but like the numbers were going up. People were contacting me and telling me to keep going. And so I thought, okay, this is a bigger problem than I thought. I'll keep going. And then 2020 happened. And of course, all of our eyes, I think, were open very wide. And
Yeah.
oh my goodness, this has been in everything. And I was one of the few people, I think, on the Christian conservative evangelical side who had already been talking about it. So I had a book that came out in 2020 on the topic, tracing the roots of it. And yeah, so right.
Was that book Social Justice Goes to Church? Is that the first one?
Yeah, well, first in one sense and not in another. I had a little. You could almost say it's a booklet. I had a book called Sacred Conviction, and it was about the Southern Baptist Convention and some of these denominations and the fight that took place before the Civil War, regarding the conflict over whether slavery was a sin in and of itself, and really abolitionism. And I put that. When is that? 2019, 2018? I forget, but I put it out there because I could see this was a big fight in the SBC, and I had already done some research on it. I added to it and expanded my research. But it was short. It was a little booklet, and all my professors said, publish this under a pseudonym. You're right about this, but and I put in all, of course, the safety measures, I suppose you could say, by letting people know this isn't intended to defend the institution of slavery and that kind of thing. But I just wanted to humanize a class of people that were being ripped down. Their statues
Mm.
were coming down, of course, but in our denominations, we were rejecting our heritage. We were saying that, like, we didn't get Christianity right until I presume like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And
Right.
everyone before us who built this denomination up, and I mean, Southeastern, a lot of people don't know this because they don't say it, but I mean, I'm sitting in classes where slaves used to work fields. I mean, it was a plantation at one time that was,
Mm.
I think, donated to Wake Forest University, and then Wake Forest sold it to Southeastern. But anyway, like, this history exists, and it was being framed in a way that vilified anyone who had any association with that institution. And so technically, yeah, you could say that was the first thing I put out there in published form. But I used a great grandfather's name. I didn't use my own name, which
Nice.
now I would have probably just used my own name, because at the time people were like, well, if you want to be in academia, you got to like kind of play the game, and don't ruffle too many feathers. And of course, now I'm just like, well, I've gone way past whatever I said
Yeah.
in that work, just on my podcast. So, yeah, I don't know that I'll be in academia anytime soon. But anyway, yeah, when you're asking about social justice goes to church, is a history of the New Left and how the New Left got into Christianity in the 60s and 70s. And then I tie it into how the current crop, so the David Platts, the Matt Chandlers, those guys, they learned from those 60s, 70s radicals. And
Right.
is one of them. Tim Keller is one of those radicals. So it's sort of an academic work. I used my thesis that I was studying at the university to for a lot of the work that went into the book.
Now, did COVID play into writing, or was it just God's timing that COVID happened right when you were releasing this book?
COVID, yeah, that's just God's timing.
Mm.
I was finishing my thesis up at the time when COVID started, so I didn't actually graduate in a ceremony because we didn't have them.
Mm-hmm.
We were postponed, and so I was really bummed out about that. I never have wanted to go to a graduation, but that was one I thought, I kind of deserve this one. I really worked hard. I wanted to walk, I couldn't, and I was kind of stuck home. Well, not just home. I went out a lot, but I was, in social distance settings and so forth, trying to work on the book. And so I don't know. It worked out. It's God's timing. I don't think it would have happened maybe without COVID, the podcast and everything else, because it forced me to kind of stay put where I was and not pursue another career or go somewhere else. And that meant I built up the podcast and wrote and those kinds of things.
Yeah. The last guest I had on, we had talked about COVID. In a sense, it was a mercy from God to reveal a lot of these things where the church is truly standing on some of these issues.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's now looking back on it on this side of it, we're almost 5 years away from it, and it's like, wow, we can't believe that actually happened.
Yeah, it's like a dream.
Yeah, really, it really is. It really is. So, I was going to ask you, is your history, is that American history particularly, your history degree?
Yeah, I'm an Americanist, they call it, or you're Europeanist or Americanist at Liberty, because those are the two tracks. So I did American. Yeah, I was actually going to study the Dutch in New York because New York was a Dutch colony, and their reactions to the Puritans, which is a element of history that's not studied much, but it's really interesting because they had some of the same issues that Southerners have with Northerners, and I was like, oh, this would be really fun. It's kind of like the area that I grew up in, and uh, the social justice stuff changed all of that. I really that's a funny part of all of this. I never wanted to study this. I still don't like studying it. Like it literally, I don't enjoy one bit getting into what a bunch of Marxists said about stuff. But I realized though this was the political battle that would shape the future for my children, and someone
Right.
needed to say something. And I was not satisfied with any of the voices in Christianity that were trying to address this. I felt like they were doing it from a liberal frame, or so they had inadequate critiques, or they were just frankly cowards and not willing to say what they knew to be true. And I just was like, someone's got to do something. So that's what motivated me to be a supplement. Not I never wanted to be like a pastor, like some pastors have podcasts. Well, you doing that right now. I mean, that's a good thing, I think. But that was never like my goal in the beginning. It was just like this one issue needs to be tackled. And after that was tackled, though, I started seeing other threats that I wanted to address. So the book that you just held up, Christianity, or sorry, Against the Waves, is really my attempt to take on liberalism as a whole and beyond what social justice was. Social justice is and was an important matter, but liberalism kind of colors everything. And
Yeah, so let's talk about liberalism for my group of listeners so they understand. Because typically, when people hear the word liberal, they automatically just assume that's the Democrat Party. So you have the liberals who are the Democrats, and then the conservatives who are the Republicans, which that's really far from the truth for both sides, to be honest. Um, so when you're talking about Christian order in a liberal age, you're referring to particularly the age that Rusty Reno is referring to in his book, The Strong Gods, Return of
yeah,
the Strong Gods, the age that we entered into after the Second World War, but particularly in the 60s.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to come up with firm dates for a lot of these things because you could say that after the French Revolution, things changed, or after the Civil War in the American context, things changed, or after World War I, things. So there were changes along the way, quite a few. But yeah, the post-war consensus idea is that a lot of these things, these strands, all came together after the Second World War, and there's a globalist instinct. Sometimes people refer to it as the great American empire, PAE. There's this sort of, I would say, imperialistic, dominating type of ethos that America propels out there that is supposed to promote things like democracy and individual freedom and universal suffrage. And really all of this comes down to this, though. It's supposed to, I think Americans think of this sometimes as like the end state. Like, this is the final goal of a political order. It should look like this.
Mhm.
But when we're young, we get slogans fed to us like diversity is our strength. No one should tell you what to do with your body. You can do anything you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. These are all slogans that are coming from a liberal framework. They're actually statements of faith. It's like reading a confession, right? But we're fed these things, and the assumption behind all of it is that unlimited choice, or as unrestricted choice as possibly can be maintained, is the final goal. That the individuals should be able to make their own, chart their own paths. And the socialist types will say that you should pay for it because some people don't have the money to pay for it.
Mm.
The libertarian types will say that's actually a violation of choice because you're taking my money. So, but in both cases, it's all about the individual expanding their choice and participation in a marketplace. And this has eroded, I think, some of the concepts that we used to take more seriously. I think they're still kind of latent in us as our people, but the idea of freedom being an ordered liberty that is restricted by the order that God has placed, especially obligations to our families and nation and the context in which we live. That responsibility has been thrown out the window because it shackles choice. And so if you go down this road, inevitably it leads to diversity and multiculturalism, because the religion doesn't really matter anymore. Not what you
Right.
believe really doesn't matter as long as you affirm the central doctrine of like choice. So it's the pinch of incense to Caesar, really, is what it is. That's what Pride Month is about. That's what I think even a lot of the civil rights regime is really about. That is no one should ever restrict choice. And there's aspects we could probably, as Christians, we could talk about some of these and say, well, we could agree that maybe for prudence sake, something like segregation was bad or something, right? But I think the key thing here is that um, there's a principled critique of all these things from a liberal order, that behind it is choice is the highest good, and human autonomy, and that's what we would reject. We would say, no, actually, human autonomy is not the organizing element of society. God's order is the organizing element of society, and we ought to conform ourselves to it, mediated through the traditions and the context in which we live. So,
Yeah. So if you were to define a nation, I find myself agreeing with you so much on when we talk about a nation having a border, and proper policies when it comes to immigration and those sorts of things. Really easy for me to understand. And I know you've said this too. Uh, think about your family. Just reduce it down to the size of the family. And when
right.
you become a Christian family, it doesn't mean you open your doors up to the whole world and give them access to your checkbook just because you're now a Christian family.
Right.
It's okay to have fences. So what would you say it is a nation?
Nation is the I think you're right to say that the seed bed, or the smallest, um, I guess, form of a nation would be a family, but it's the extension of that. So I look in the Bible, Genesis 10, 11, 12, you see nations are forming in those chapters as families go out and settle in regions. And they take on the particularities that will naturally take place as you live in a region and you only have access to certain plants. You engage in certain activities because of the land and the location and what's available. You develop different folklore as you have shared experience. I mean, all of these things are very particular to people groups, and then of course God further divides this by separating based on language, and so linguistics, I think, is probably the most. Some people will say like, oh, it's religion, oh, it's genetics, lineage, oh, it's, they'll find their element. I think all of these elements play into what a nation is, but I think language actually is probably the most defining feature.
Yeah.
If you can't communicate to someone, then you have no basis for cooperation whatsoever. You must be able to communicate.
Yeah.
So obviously, technology is helping get rid of some of these things, but even with the best technology, you're still language barriers that exist, and God wanted to implement those so that man would fulfill the purpose he had, which was to fill the earth, and so a nation, yes, is an extension of the family, and with all the particular affinities that go with that.
So there's a phrase that I'm not sure who coined it, but it's called proposition nation. And you talk about this in your book. And do you, in your study of history with the founders, would you say that by what your definition of proposition nation is, you maybe expand on that, that was the vision of the founding fathers?
No, I don't think it was a vision of the founders at all. I mean, you could find little things here or there that maybe you could later justify. I mean, people do this in history all the time. They'll find a quote that seems to justify something that came later, but that person never would have affirmed what came later. So I think the founders, in some ways, were medieval. To be quite honest, they were pretty pre-modern. Now, a lot of people emphasize, oh, they borrowed from these Enlightenment thinkers like Locke or Montesquieu. I talk about that a little bit in the book. Yes, but even those Enlightenment thinkers, who I think that's overemphasized to some extent, but even they were trying to freeze frame some aspect of Christian civilization and conserve it. John Locke, for example, thought atheists should be drummed out of polite society.
Right.
Right. I mean, a modern liberal would never say this. So it was somewhat of a transitional period between the old world and the new world. But I think the founders were actually trying to do a conservative thing in seceding from Great Britain. Great Britain was not honoring their rights as Englishmen, and things had changed in Great Britain, and they were separated by an ocean. They were appealing to an old order that was no longer really present in Britain, or at least it wasn't as uh, strong as it was in the colonies. And they, really the argument was between one group of British citizens or subjects in the New World and another group of British subjects in Great Britain, and whether or not they should have the same privileges and so forth. And of course, if you read the Declaration of Independence, you can see all of this itemized and listed out. But the proposition nation, I think, developed. I mean, I'm not going to say there weren't people in the founding era who wanted something like this, but
Define real quick just what you mean
yeah,
by proposition nation.
I think the proposition nation. We so that's sort of anachronistic. We use that term now. I don't know who first coined it, but it's mostly referring to the Gettysburg Address. And by the time Abraham Lincoln is elected president, you have to look at the conditions on the ground. You had a lot of people coming here from Europe, especially, but you also had African slaves and their descendants who had been here for a while. Slave trade was supposed to end in 1808, but there was still some black market going on there, and we there was also Native Americans or indigenous people, whatever you want to call the people who were here before Europeans came, and so all of these different people are here. And as a lot of people come in to settle out in the Midwest from Europe and even Catholics and so forth, which now that seems like a small thing. At that time, that was big. Like Catholics are so different. There needed to be a basis for cooperation, and so some kind of like inclusion, so that, I mean, there's a war going on, so we're recruiting Irish people in New York. I mean, you come off the boat and then step off the boat and you're recruited to go fight Southerners or whatever. Like Germans in the Midwest who were one generation deep. Many of them came from the 1848 socialist revolutions that failed, and they fled and came here. They were how do you organize an army to preserve the Union and justify these people living here if you don't give them some shared basis? So I do think the circumstances somewhat led to this, but the proposition nation became this idea that the founders wanted equality and were doing something novel, that they were the first nation and they were forming a nation based upon this abstract principle of equality. And that all of these immigrant groups that were coming over, that's what they shared in common, was they also believed in equality. And if, as long as you believe in all people are created equal, you're an American, right? So it's a low bar. And it has advantages to it. It does allow you to settle if you have a lot of land that needs to be settled, and you can settle that land and you can
Mhm.
expand your economy, and you can make everyone part of this universal mission to spread equality. And that's what we had with a lot of social reform movements towards the latter part of the 19th century. And then into World War One, I think this blossomed into the progressive era, globalism, Woodrow Wilson wanting the League of Nations, and we're going to have the war to end all wars. We're
Mhm.
going to finally end all the divisions that have existed in human society based on class, based on nationality, based on religion, all the wars of religion in Europe. We can end all of that.
Mhm.
Because we're not, those factors don't matter anymore. We'll just minimize all those things. And as long as we have shared ideas in our head, uh, especially in regard to equality and the expansion of human freedom, then hey, we can band together and we can have peace finally. And that's really what then led into the post-war consensus, which is this ethos that you can't question. That as soon as you start saying that, hey, maybe Christianity should be the default setting of our society, you're a bigot, and
Mhm.
you're questioning the order that that people freak out because it's like that we had wars of religion. You want to go back to the Dark Ages where we fought over Protestant versus Catholic. Is that what you want? No, of course that's not what I want. But we're also finding out there's consequences to
Yeah.
dumping all those things,
Yeah.
and the consequence, sometimes cures are worse than the disease. That's what we're figuring out. So yeah, I hope that
No,
yeah,
that's great. That's great.
there you
Yeah,
go.
it's very. Think very simply, and it's there's no neutral ground. You have a Christian culture, or you have drag queen story hour. That's what it seems that we're
Yeah,
seeing in our world now. Which one do you want?
and the liberals will have they have their sort of cherry picked history with like all the points at which they thought the conditions were the worst. They'll remind you of those things. They'll say, well, there was slavery. There was a time when women couldn't vote. There was a time when children were working in factories, and we didn't have public schools for them to go to. And like they'll have these things they bring up. And in each of those circumstances, whether it's arranged marriages or divine right of kings or whatever it is, there's always trade-offs, and that's what I think we tend to ignore. I don't know, like if you watch any medieval movie, like I don't know if do you have kids that watch art?
Yeah. Well, I've got a 5-year-old daughter and a 8-month-old son. So my
Okay.
daughter does what like some stuff like that. Of course,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
just like you were talking about on your thing yesterday between C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, and thankfully my wife is just so on board and agreement with, yeah, she's gonna watch Tolkien versus Star Wars.
Right, right. Some fantasies are better than others, and you gotta teach them discernment, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm not against like Disney princess stuff. In fact, my daughter will probably watch some princess. I want her to have fun and
Yeah.
be. But here's the thing: like if you look at most of those cartoons and and any even adult medieval type film, I've always spotted two themes. They're like it's one or the other. It's either I'm gonna marry for love. It's like this breaking with tradition. Like I'm not gonna marry for duty anymore. I'm gonna marry for love, Dad. Or
Hmm.
the people should decide. It's like the king coming to the realization that actually he shouldn't be the final decision maker. It's the people, right? That's like the moral of every medieval type film that Hollywood produces today, because they're trying to tell you that the past was this horrible, dark place. But at the same time, the funny part is they long for aspects of the hierarchy that existed. They think that it's kind of like I don't know, like Downton Abbey is really cool in a way that they regimented these different strata of society, and there was honor and there was respect, and we're fascinated with the royal family of Great Britain for some reason. So we sort of miss some of these things, but we also then quickly villainize them if given the opportunity. And so all of these things have trade-offs. Like I think I'm glad that we don't have chattel slavery. I don't think that was good. I think there were many abuses connected to that. The trade-off, though, was uh, we have, a million slaves that are some of the estimates that starved and died after a brutal war.
Hmm.
And now are many of whom their descendants are in perpetual um, uh, reliance on an impersonal federal government. And it's like, I mean, there and the numbers of homes that are just single parent it's incredible. Like the
Hmm.
drugs, all the rest. Like you can look at these situations and you can say sometimes, along with the liberals, like, oh, you had a point. There's husbands who abuse their wives. There's kings who abuse their kingdoms. You're right. A situation where you have labor that relationships and arrangements where the people who are in charge of the labor can't really be questioned. Yeah, that could make for like you could look at all these things, but then you also have to say, and what's the trade-off? Like, what's the alternative? And that's, I think, what conservatives are very concerned with is like when you take offense away, what comes in to replace it? Because there's going to be hierarchy. It's inevitable. You're going to have patriarchy. I mean, even the Bible says this, like she's going to try to rule over him, but it's not going to work. It's just because God designed nature in a certain way, and we have sin to contend with. So I think the conservative and the Christian instincts have been primarily, how do we seek the best, the good, the true, the beautiful, the moral law of God? How do we do that in our society, the way that our society is arranged with all the weaknesses and sins that exist? And we're not going to have perfection, but how do we do that? That's the big question. And liberals have more of a utopian dream in their mind for what a equality society looks like. They've never achieved, but they're willing to foist on everyone despite the consequences of it.
So I know you said earlier, we can't really pinpoint. History is always so complex. I was myself trying to do a little studying on World War I yesterday and the causes of that. And it's never just one singular thing. It seems that there's all these events that happen. And particularly when we look at American history, there's a lot of buildup to a lot of different things. And uh, we're being taught a certain perspective. I don't know who says this. I don't know if Doug Wilson had taken it from Chesterton but it's something about, when the victors write the history books, that's really the story that we're getting for the most part. We have to do some digging.
Or writes the history books. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to transition to the church, particularly a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you think it was the takeover of the modern institutions that push this liberal order so much into the church? I mean, because everybody was just born into it. I was born in '87, similar to your age, and it's what we were born into. Particularly that Reagan era. But what do you think? Like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, it wasn't just one event, but a slow indoctrination process.
Yeah.
And then it slowly has worked its way into the church.
Well, it affected every institution. What we call the liberal order, the modern liberal order, is in everything. I don't know of an institution that's. I mean, the Eastern Orthodox will try to say like, "Oh, we're not part of that," because, but the only reason they can say that is because they were under communism for so many years in a foreign country, and now they have immigration coming here, and they're saying we kind of like sidestep that whole thing of that the West was doing. I mean, it's really only Eastern traditions that are able to even try to approach that. But I even think they bought into they're buying into modernity especially when they come over here, or the liberal order, I should say.
Would you say that's the same, modernity and the liberal order, pretty much?
No, not exactly. So the liberal order comes out of modernity. Modernity is like that would take me a little more to explain, but simplified, I say modernity is like the enthusiastic view of man that we can. It's humanism, it's Enlightenment rationalism. We can overcome, and that the world works kind of like a machine. That there's going to be one principle or one element that you can construct a whole entire society around. So, Nazism's modern, just like communism's modern. They have different elements they construct everything around, but they're still looking for the scientific kind of silver bullet that unlocks every door. And man is able to do this. Man's able to figure it out. So it's a denial of sin in a way behind all of it, that we can be perfected and that kind of thing. So that's modernity, but liberalism is a specific form, I would say, of a modern impulse. So in liberalism, it's the choice, and the expansion of choice becomes the highest good. Whereas in some of these other orders, that's not the thing they boil it all down to. So in the church, though, to get back to what you were saying about the church, I think that in the church, in the United States, which is our context, you have the fundamentalists fighting hard against the modernists. The modernists they're modern, and they call them modernists, and it's not modern in the same sense that I'm talking about, but it is related. Modernism in theology is the denial of uh, things like miracles and the biblical accounts. And you saw this happening in seminaries, and there were different reactions, right? So in Germany, you had the neo Orthodox who said, well, yeah, maybe it's not true on that level, but it is true on a higher level. So, like, and I mean, and they're half right. Like, it is, there are lessons to be learned from the Garden of Eden, right? Beyond just perhaps the account, but the account is also true. Like, if you undercut that, you lose it all. So, it's not Lord of the Rings you're reading. You are reading an actual story about what literally took place. And the fundamentalists in our country wanted to uh, basically put up some hard gates and make sure that they were strictly guarded and no one came through. So they abandoned these mainline denominations. They formed their own Bible schools, but they gained a reputation for being rigid and culturally too fundamentalist. So it wasn't just theology, but well, they're also trying to draw lines around dancing and playing cards and all the rest. Um, and so one of the reactions to that was the evangelical movement, and not evangelical. You see, these terms are getting hard, but not evangelical in the broad theological sense, but in the cultural American sense. And sometimes we call this neo evangelicalism. They wanted influence in the world, and they felt fundamentalists had gotten rid of that. And in order to get influence in the world, they had to go along with the liberal agenda on some
Hmm.
level. So you look at Carl Henry, who wrote The Uneasy Conscience of Modern Fundamentalism, 1947. He basically says in that book that nations are keyed to these leaders who are going to be a certain way. The best way for me to explain this is like you turn on the news, and if they have an expert come on to talk about mental health, let's say in a shooting scenario, it will
Yeah.
be a psychologist. It won't be a pastor. So Carl Henry is saying basically, like, pastors have lost respect. We need to make sure that our pastors are basically psychologists, community organizers, and therapists. So let's expand the training they get so that people will listen to them again. But what that did was it kind of it, it sent the signal out that we don't have anything uniquely transcendent and good here at the church. Like, the actual things that you need are in the world. We can just do the world better here than the world does it. And we've had that instinct, I think, growing and growing ever since then. And all the institutions associated with this, Christianity Today, World Vision, Fuller Theological Seminary, and I would say since then, newer institutions like the Gospel Coalition, they've all gone this way. They've
Yeah.
all decided that they want to be relevant to the world, and really that is a reconciliation with the liberal order. So Christianity, I mean, look at the apologetics industries. Their main job, it seems like, in many apologetics ministries, is to reconcile Christianity with liberalism, to try to get God off the hook. God's not sexist. The Old Testament wasn't actually uh, regulating slavery. No, God didn't genocide anyone. That He didn't kill the children. Like, there's all these rationalist ways we try to get people who are modern and egalitarian to accept the Bible without having it conflict with their underlying presuppositions.
Yeah, so true. So you see this slow infestation of this liberal order into all the institutions, which then breeds it into the church. And as time goes on, we're seeing more and more of these institutions like Christianity Today and the Gospel Coalition and Tim Keller himself, and just showing the corruption of it. Megan Basham's book Shepherds for Sale was a huge just axe to a lot of those guys, and you were on that probably before she was in a lot of the stuff that you were seeing in Southeastern,
Mhm.
and it's I don't know, disheartening, I guess is the word, but I'm also hopeful because we are seeing this, and there is light that's being brought to this, and we're even seeing how there's money funneling from uh, the liberal hierarchy into these actual institutions.
Yeah, there is. That's some of the motivation too, right? It's not just ideology. There's also people who are nefarious, I think,
Yeah.
in the Democrat Party, and they look at the evangelical voter bloc and they think, well, if we can just get them to move a few points to the left, we start winning elections again. So let's try to fund materials that will persuade them, even if it's not to vote Democrat, at least not to vote Republican. because the Republican Party, even though the Republican Party represents um, some aspects of liberalism, it's usually earlier iterations of it, and it's also it is a firm, I think, especially with Trump now, populist undercurrent that values a lot of conservative principles and values. So
Well, yeah, that's when you talk about politics, and there's for everybody, it's the dividing line. You're either Democrat or you're a Republican, and
yeah,
Christians are navigating through that. And for me, the choice clearly isn't hard on which party to back up right now. But the reality is the Republican Party is still far from conservative in the sense you even talk about this in your book with some of the big leaders like Ted Cruz and Charlie Kirk and these guys that are okay with homosexual marriage.
yeah, it's funny that in 2015 that seemed to be like the big thing, and there were conservatives who had already given up on it. But after that ruling in Obergefell, it's like that was the final word. Yeah, I guess no one's allowed to challenge gay marriage anymore,
Right.
and we're still there. We're still, frankly, there where we can now challenge men and women's sports, but we can't challenge previous gains that progressives have made, and we need to on some. I'm not saying not to do it prudently. We need to be prudent and choose our battles wisely, but I think that we we're denying reality. Like if a reporter asks, like, you have to say, no, that's not a marriage. Of course not. Like that's ridiculous. And anyone who thinks that needs to think harder about it because this not just tradition, but just the very order that God has created screams that men and women are made for each other, not those of the same sex. So we're not willing to go there though in the political arena, and this is the encouraging thing though, and I don't know where this is all going to go, but on the populist level, so like people who don't have uh, leadership in influential institutions, but they make up these institutions by consuming material or funding them, or just they don't have the option. They have to live, so they have to have some of these institutions over them. I think there's a lot of conservative instincts out there, and it's just not in our leadership class. I don't know to what extent, but it certainly seems it's a lot of those kinds of people who put Trump in office. It also seems to me like you're in like a Calvary Chapel type tradition,
Mm.
and the Bible Church tradition, the Calvary Chapel tradition, some of these we would say lower church traditions, and that's not a negative thing. That just
Mhm.
means they don't have a high liturgy like the mainlines did. A lot of those folks are very willing to conform to the Bible, to live by the Bible, to like maybe they're not going to end up uh, in extremely influential positions. Who I don't know, but I think the paradigm's shifting very quickly, and as people realize their leadership class has completely failed on so many basic things, I'm kind of encouraged that we are going to see more guys who are of that mindset that used to be viewed as archaic and from the dark ages, like, but it's actually just common sense and like
Mhm.
trying to live in the world that God created in the best way. Those people are gonna, I think, start rising in certain ways. And there was an example of it last week, actually, in the White House. I don't necessarily like all the people who are in the Faith Commission that was
Right.
there, or Faith Office, but there were some new faces. You have to look at what was before and what there is now. And it
Right.
seems the people in that room, there's more solid people as a percentage than there ever has been. And they are, people who, want to talk about things like, you know what, maybe a woman who chooses to have an abortion isn't just a victim.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, these are the kinds of things they're talking about. They're talking about things like, how do we ensure that we acknowledge God in every American celebration that we have. And, we just, 2 years ago, last year, we had a transgender visibility day on Easter. That's not
Mhm.
happening now. That's not going to happen. So I'm encouraged. I think there's some guys who maybe have been overlooked that are going to start calling shots, and who knows where that goes.
I am encouraged too, and this is where we obviously know Donald Trump is not the Christian prince, but we have to play the long game and be wise in our decisions. The abolition movement for abortion. I would call myself an abolitionist, but the way I get there versus how radical abolitionists get there might be different. Yes, I want
Same.
abortion abolished today, right? But the reality is we have to play the right game to get to the point to where it's actually completely abolished. And that was a big problem with a lot of voting Christian voters, even particularly with Donald Trump. And this is an example of the Republican Party not being conservative in the sense of, as Christians, we're not right or left. There's no third way where Jesus is in the middle of the Democrats and the Republicans, right? And that's been a big conversation recently, but we're way off to the right. The Bible's way over here.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the Republican Party used to be more conservative, I would say. Now they've always had, the funny thing is the Democrats at one point, like Thomas Jefferson was he would have been in one of the sort of, I guess, early stages of the Democrat Party. Andrew Jackson too. I mean, they used to have Jefferson Jackson dinners I think it was every year in the Democratic Party. Now they think those guys should be erased. So it's funny how the parties have changed, but the Republican, like, there is no other place for Christians to go.
Mm-hmm.
The Republican Party is really the only place, and it was giving them a seat at the table, but I don't think it's just doing that now. They have a seat at the table, and they also have the ability to actually influence some things now. And so I think it'd be foolish not to give support to the Republican Party if it's going to be someone from one of these two parties who ends up getting into office. But obviously, that's not our final allegiance. And the conservative Christian instincts that have made this place what it is, and that it really is what it is. We are an Anglo-Protestant country. That's our defining feature, more than probably anything else. That's what led to our laws and to our social mores and to all the things that we enjoy and call American. We, I think, as Christians, we hearken back to that as modern Christians, as just Bible believing Christians. We're hearkening back to those who actually settled this place and built this place, and some of those people have been forgotten about, but we're remaining vestiges of them. And so I think it's our job to cultivate that again, to be unapologetic about what the Bible says. And then, as you rightly said, with something like abolitionism, I think, to be prudent. Politics is the art of the possible, and you have to look at the situation that you're in. And Daniel had to do this, right? Daniel had to look at the situation he was in and do the best thing that he knew how to the best of his ability within the constraints that he had. And I think God honored him for that. But you could say, like, oh, Daniel, like, you were in charge of all these magi. You should probably have just made sure that they all died.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, just make it the way it should be. And Daniel was wise enough to see why God had him there, what the victories that God had set him up for, and to be patient as well. I mean, obviously Israel was enduring their own judgment at the time, and so he had a specific purpose. But I think that that would be good for Christians to go back and look at some of these biblical examples of people who were in pagan times with constraints. Esther's another one, right? How do you actually live in a society that's controlled and dominated by something that you don't agree with? You can do it. It's possible to do it. Like, you're not compromising by doing it unless you personally compromise, unless you sin, and you're compromising.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Well, we only got a couple minutes left. And we're going to wrap this up, but I'd like to give or hear your take on something practical. So for someone listening or who's going to read your book and they're overwhelmed, they feel like, whoa, that was just a ton of information and I don't know how to process all of that. What do you think are some of the practical steps they could take after reading your book and listening to your podcast and other things to start pushing back against this narrative?
Well, first, use it as a reference. My books are my friends. I don't always read them even all the way through, but I consult them when I need them. So just don't feel overwhelmed. I tell people some chapters might be the chapters you need because they're pretty self-contained, and other chapters might not be. But as far as practical steps in our everyday, ordinary lives, there's a few things. One is evaluate the influence that God's given you. Where can you be a bigger influence? Where can you ascertain some level of power, for example? And I think that's a big thing that Christians have neglected for some time. Is they haven't pursued power the way that. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call now, and I'm trying to
That's
hold
okay.
on. here. It's distracting me. I thought it was different at first. I was like, that's a faint phone call. Where's that coming from? So give me. All right. Where was I? So pursue influence in the areas God has given you. Obviously, don't try to step outside of that. But if God's given you a town and they have school board elections and there's, I don't know, an open seat that maybe you could run for in the political realm, consider that. I think Christians run away from that because they don't want the grief or the blowback, but consider that. Also, consider obviously raising your kids. I think a lot of Christians outsource this kind of thing to the public schools or other institutions or the church. So it's really not their responsibility. It's your responsibility, and you need to oversee that. So I'm not
Can I
saying
interject something here real quick?
absolutely.
In your study of American history and the Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-Protestant history, do you see a lot of clergy / politicians? Like, my question is, should pastors be the ones who are politicians, or should pastors be focusing on the pastorate?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's nothing prohibiting pastors from running for office if they want to do that. You have to be careful with that because you have a congregation to teach, and if you neglect them because of these higher aspirations in your mind, then you might fail as a pastor or something. But some people can do both. I think I'm trying to remember which president was. I want to say maybe Taft. Now I'm blanking on which. There was a president though who would preach sermons while he was in the White House. I should probably today. Normally you go to Google, but today you could just go to Grok and they'll tell you in like 2 seconds.
Grok is where it's at. That's all I use anymore.
What pastor preached while in the White House. I just type it in and it'll spit back at me which one, and it'll see if I was right, if it was Taft. I don't remember exactly.
Taft was, if my history is right, was one of the only ones that became a Supreme Court justice after being president.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Taft.
Well, Grok doesn't know the answer. Wow, I guess I knew something Grok doesn't know, so I'll have to look that up later. It's telling me Billy Graham. Billy Graham was never president, though. Sorry, Grok. But anyway, yeah, I mean, there were people who I know at lower levels as well were involved in politics. And obviously, a lot of people go back to the Black Robes Regiment and say, like, look at these guys in the American Revolution. They were saying political things, but at the same time, they were also preaching and maintaining a church. So should pastors, that really depends on the situation and what the responsibilities are, but there's nothing prohibiting them, I don't think, from doing that. But I think for pastors, since you bring that up, pastors do need to be aware of kind of what's going on in the lives of their congregations. Don't just preach expositorily and not apply it to their lives, which a lot of guys do. And it's an easy way to sidestep controversy because, hey, we're in the book of First Timothy. I guess I'm not going to talk about the fact that BLM is rioting right down the street, right? Like, why don't you actually take the opportunity and address from the Bible what's going on and help people navigate that because they look to you for moral guidance. So that's for pastors, but for everyone else, pursue influence, make sure you raise your families. I think getting to know your own history, tapping into roots that maybe have been forgotten is important. Be open to sometimes unconventional approaches. Like, for example, if you live in Idaho, right, which I think you just said you did, right?
Yeah, we're in Idaho, southern Idaho.
There's a movement to redraw some state lines there to accept, I think, I don't know exactly.
Half of Oregon, the red half of Oregon.
Just Oregon, or is it also Washington and Northern?
I think there's some parts up there too. Like it's the closer those people live to Idaho, the more conservative they are and want to be a part of Idaho. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, be open to some unconventional approaches. Like that might actually be a good thing. It might be a win for Idaho. I don't know. It's definitely a win for those in Oregon who,
for sure.
Yeah, it's a win for them to be part of Idaho. So, but that's one of the things I think the liberal order has. I don't know. I think this is really part of it, but there's this kind of weird conception. I think it's a little weird. The United States must have these boundaries that look this way, and it can't change. Why not? Like that is one of the things I've asked. Like, why? That's a little weird. Like if people are, if you literally have two different kinds of people living in the same government in the same state, that's going to produce conflict. And if you can literally redraw a border and avoid that, like, why not? I don't get it. But be open to unconventional approaches that will protect your ability to continue to teach Christianity. In New York, where I live, I mean, that was getting a little dicey even a few years ago, whether we were going to be able, with the COVID stuff, to continue to just operate as Christians. I mean, they took away the religious exemption for the vaccine, that was an attack on religious liberty. They shut down the churches. I mean, this was, if it not for county sheriffs that would not enforce some of these things, I mean, churches would have been shut down for a while. So obviously, yeah, be open to some of those things, and build, build where you can. Think this is one of the things in Proverbs you see: lay up treasure for your children's children, not just for your crews that you want to take when you're retired. Put back into the civilization that's given so much to you. So
yeah, hey man, that's really good. My Grok told me it was James Garfield.
James Garfield. That is you're absolutely right. Why did Grok? What did you ask?
Did you put in what pastor or what president?
Oh,
I heard you say pastor, and I was wondering if that's what you typed in. So I put in president.
I thought president, but I wrote pastor.
Hey, we got babies. We we don't sleep at night anymore, so we have excuses.
Yeah, sorry. I think I even audibly said, "Yeah, what pastor?" And then I was chiding Grok. No, Grok did its job. You're right.
Well, the question was tricky. It was pastor or pastor politician sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Grok's still actually not giving me the right answer. That's funny. I typed in what president preached while in the White House, and it's telling me Jimmy Carter possibly and Woodrow Wilson. So you have a better copy than me. I don't know if you're paying extra or what.
I'm gonna we'll have to send a little message to Elon and say, hey, what's going on with this?
I don't know.
Yeah. All right, Jon. Hey, I appreciate it, man. The conversation is great. I know that some of our listeners will probably listen to it a few times and maybe carry on to you. So where you just tell them where they find you at. Where they find everything.
Jon Harris, podcast.com.
And it's just Jon, not John.
Yeah, Jon. Yeah, not Jahan, John. And they can go there. They can go to, I think now johnharrismedia.com. Those are probably the easiest places to find the podcast. And then if they have any questions about, I mean, obviously we sort of skim the surface of some of these things. They might wonder, like, what do you think, we should have a monarchy, John, or something? Like, I didn't say that, but if they have any questions along those lines, my socials are all there, and I'm pretty receptive to questions and so forth. So
yeah, you were really open to me. I just reached out to you and sent you an email, and you got right back. So not everybody does that. Not everybody with bigger platforms, anyway. So
I try.
It's awesome.